Welcome into the Retirement Key podcast. My name is Abe Abich, the founder and CEO of Abich Financial Services. Very excited today to have a huge mover and shaker here in Loudoun County join the podcast with us today. Buddy Rizer is a certified economic developer who sits on the board of directors for the Northern Virginia Technology Council, the Northern Virginia Community College, and the Washington Airports Task Force. As executive director for Loudoun Economic Development, Buddy leads the agency responsible for encouraging growth and developing relationships with Loudoun's business community in both commercial and agricultural sectors. During his tenure, Buddy and his team have attracted more than $60 billion in new commercial investments and have generated more than 50,000 new jobs. In this time, growth in the commercial base has helped lower the tax rate in Loudoun by more than 42 cents on the dollar, saving residents thousands of dollars annually on their tax bill. That is always good to hear. Buddy Rizer, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Abe. Really excited to have the conversation with you today.
Well, let's get right to it. You know, Buddy, I was talking with you before we started this podcast. When I think of prominent figures and leaders here in the DC metro area, and especially Loudoun County, I think of you. And so what inspired you to transition from the private sector prior to public service now and taking on this role with the county and Loudoun Economic Development?
Yeah, absolutely. I did the first part of my life in rock and roll radio.
Okay.
I worked in radio for about 30 years. And when that came to an end, I really thought, what do I want to do next? And the more I thought about it, it needed to have something to do with community service. It needed to have some aspects that kind of tied in the rest of my life, the interest in marketing and the business side. And I had served on a couple of economic development advisory groups while I was in the private sector. And I thought, working with businesses, helping communities grow, that would be really exciting for me. And I was very fortunate to land here in Loudoun County. And over the last 18 years, it's been just been a tremendous ride and something I've enjoyed very, very much.
Loudoun County is supposed to be one of the fastest growing counties. You would know, obviously, one of the fastest growing counties in the country, perhaps one of the highest income per households, if not the number one, highest income per household county in the country. Just amazing, tremendous opportunity here. The resources that we have in this county are amazing. And then we'll talk about our family and business here as well. But I love living and working in Loudoun County. So thank you for all you've done and continue to do here in the county. What, as you transitioned into helping this county grow, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned?
Well, going from the private sector to the public sector is a little bit of a culture shock.
Oh, yeah.
When I first started, I was surprised that I couldn't just do whatever I wanted to do and when I wanted to do it. There's a process for everything. It takes a little bit of time to be able to do things, and you have a bunch of those kind of processes that you need to go through. But once I understood that, we really run Loudoun Economic Development like a small business.
Yep.
Our office, if you walk into it, it looks like a small business, and we're very entrepreneurial. We've done things like, creating a logo and a slogan, and we have T-shirts, and we do marketing. We've tried to really take what economic development traditionally was and re-envision it for a Loudoun County type thing where we know this is fast growing. We know that this is tech oriented. We know that we have a balance between East and West. How do we maximize that? And that's the kind of strategy I think that I was able to bring from the private sector into a public sector position.
Yep. On the ground with local small businesses. So just helping to grow this county. I love it. What are some of the biggest challenges you faced? And also, what are some of the most, gratifying parts of your role in leading this initiative, helping this county grow every day?
Yeah, when I started, the county was, and it's hard to believe today, but we were not in great financial status when I started here. We were 81% dependent on residential real estate.
Wow.
So when the housing bubble burst, we lost about a third of our revenue. We were laying people off. The taxes went up to $1.28.5. We were cutting back on services. It's hard to believe, but back then we didn't even have full day kindergarten in Loudoun County.
Wow.
So my job was, let's grow the commercial tax base. Let's find a way to build businesses so that there's not as much burden on the residents. So I think the most gratifying thing for me is that we have created a very resilient, U.S. News and World Report said that we were the strongest local economy in the country.
Wow.
So we're very proud of the fact that we went from a little bit of shaky ground and kind of built something that has been, I think pretty secure. When you look at the region, most of the jurisdictions have had to raise taxes over the last few years. We've been able to reduce ours, as you mentioned earlier, by 42 cents on the dollar. We're at 86.5 now. And frankly, we'll probably lower it again this year when we get to tax time. So giving people that opportunity, saving, an average home in Loudoun County, those homeowners save about $3,600 a year in taxes, thanks to the lowering of the tax rate in Loudoun County. A lot of that is good management, and we have tremendous people working in the county. But being able to contribute to that and building this community where we have great roads and great schools and great amenities and, a really secure future, that's one of the most rewarding things I've ever done professionally.
On behalf of all the taxpayers and myself here in the county, thank you for lowering our tax bills. I know we all greatly appreciate that. Well, as you know, my family lives in Leesburg, and our headquarters, Abich Financial, is in Ashburn, right across from One Loudoun, right off of Route 7, kind of what we feel is like the downtown part of Loudoun County, and just growing. Every blade of grass in this area is just being built on and growing. It's just fun to watch. But we're business owners here, and we have our roots here firmly, planted in Loudoun County. We have a vested interest in the growth of this county and the community. How do you establish and utilize partnerships within the community to influence your initiatives and your growth?
Yeah, and partnerships are such an incredibly important part of what we do. Let's just talk about workforce. The fact that we have grown so fast from a commercial standpoint has really put workforce as one of the key limiting factors. If we're not able to find the workforce for our businesses, then we will stop growing. So working with the K through 12 system, the academies of Loudoun, working directly with the community college. And I'm very proud to be on the board for the community college. The way we approach that training and, the community college, what I love about it is because, the county can work with business and the community college to really identify what those programs are. For example, data centers. Obviously we've grown a lot in data centers, and we ran into a situation where we were having a hard time filling positions. So we worked with the community college, created a data center operations program that has been so successful. We just started another version of it in Prince William County. The people that are coming out of that program, it's like 98% placement rate to 100,000 K jobs plus.
Wow.
So those kinds of things, being able to leverage those partnerships is important. When you think about the airport, how do we work with the airport to continue to grow that part of the economy? The various chambers and technology councils. Really, economic development is very much a team sport. Yeah. And having, business leaders engaged in Loudoun County, unlike any other place I've seen, it has really made a big difference between our Rural Economic Development Council, the Economic Development Authority, the Economic Development Advisory Commission. All of these groups have made significant improvements and really significant impact in what we do to continue to grow the economy here.
Well, we live almost a mile from downtown Leesburg, buddy, which is awesome. We can just walk to downtown. And so, I'm thinking about the county growing so fast. And while I enjoy that, I know, we have a lot of clients and listeners that will live in, downtown Purcellville, downtown Middleburg, Leesburg. And there's so many just cute, historic towns here that people love in this county. How do you continue to grow, but make sure the residents that live kind of near these towns, that you preserve Loudoun County's unique character and quality of life?
Yeah, and I would tell you one of the really unique things about Loudoun County is that diversity. The fact that we have Western Loudoun as a rural zone, and then we have big parts of the county as a suburban zone. And now with the metro, we're creating an urban zone. It really is something for everyone and the best of all worlds. I think the Board of Supervisors and the citizens have done an amazing job preserving Western Loudoun. Um, it's important because there is so much pressure for growth. And that's why we spend so much time, for example, working with rural businesses to continue to grow. Because if they can utilize their land in ways that doesn't involve building homes, then we can keep them in farmland, or we can keep them in other types of rural businesses. So we have put a real emphasis. I mean, we've drawn a pretty strong line, between the transition zone and the rural policy area, where we are really limiting the amount of development that you can do.
Okay.
And I don't see that ever changing, frankly.
Yeah.
I think that is a commitment that we have seen from the board and from the citizens. And we have the very high tech part of Loudoun County, and we spend a lot of time on that. But we have entire teams that focus on helping rural businesses and tourism businesses and those kinds of businesses that have been really, really important to the culture of Loudoun County. And it's funny because so many of the Eastern businesses point to the fact that we have those rural assets as one of the reasons why their employees like living here.
I see.
So it really is an important part of what we do.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, Western Loudoun with all the wineries and breweries, distilleries, farmland, horse country. It's just, it's such a cool county because you have this combination of all of it, city life and tech. And you've got places like One Loudoun where you've got all this mixed use and restaurants and living and shops. And then you can drive 20 minutes west and you feel like you're away from it all, which is, Shelley and I and our clients really love.
Well, I tell you, it could be, and you've seen in other places where it becomes East versus West.
Right.
And in Loudoun, it really hasn't been that.
Yeah.
They're very much complementary to each other.
Yep.
And they both benefit from each other. So I think that's really an important point that you make. Having that ability to do both is something that a lot of people really enjoy.
Yep. Well, obviously, you guys are huge in helping small businesses grow. So what do you think have been some of the most effective strategies that, Loudoun Economic Development has used to support entrepreneurs and small and local businesses here in the county?
Yeah, we've tried very hard to make sure that we're creating an environment where small businesses can thrive. We've done that for a long time, but COVID really taught us a lot. We learned a lot from our small businesses. First of all, we had one of the lowest business failure rates in the entire country during COVID.
Wow.
I think a lot of that speaks to the fact that we had a lot of support, that, we quickly came out with local loan programs and grant programs really before anybody else as a bridge to, the government loans that eventually would come. We moved very quickly on that. Within weeks, the board was allocating money for that. But I think it's really, the lessons learned from that were that businesses needed those basic support. There's running your business, but then there's the actual doing the business, right? I mean, you have to not only be able to be great at producing whatever it is you produce or providing whatever service you provide, but you also have to be able to make payroll and negotiate leases and talk about patents and talk about, all those other things. So what we decided to do is make sure that those basic skill sets were available to our businesses. We've given away like QuickBooks. You come to our QuickBooks training, you get to have a subscription to QuickBooks. Wow. Because we saw a lot of businesses that frankly were still coming in to apply for grants with, shoe boxes. And so we wanted to make sure that was there. We're doing legal seminars, and we created the Launch Loudoun program because of the things that we saw during COVID. Right. The other thing that we've done is instead of having a central location, we're taking that training into each of the communities. So we'll be in Purcellville one day, and then we'll be in Lovettsville, and then we'll be in the Dulles area, Sterling, Algonquian. because you know this, running your business, sometimes you get so busy running your business, you don't have time to really manage your business.
Exactly.
And so asking someone from Sterling or from Percival to come into a central location to take a class, that might not be the best way to approach that. So,
Right.
We wanted to make sure that we were having that, but then we wanted to make sure that we were also taking the services to the businesses as well.
Got it. Excellent. Excellent. And we really appreciate that. And on behalf of small business owners here in the county, we appreciate all your support. Well, you've been a huge leader in tech in this county, and we're pretty influential in helping, Loudoun County become, nicknamed Data Center Alley, and so Loudoun County has become a hub for the tech industry. With that, and with so many new jobs coming into the county, we can assume that a lot of young people maybe will start moving to the county from places east of here. What growth are you seeing in younger generations and older populations? Because as you know, we primarily help people 55 to 60 and older as well. And as we were talking about before we started the podcast, there are many 55 plus communities, which are great for our clients also.
Well, so much of it is housing product, right? We've seen just some amazing 55 plus communities come into Loudoun County. And it's really awesome on a couple of levels. First of all, providing that product so that our citizens can stay here in Loudoun County and take advantage of everything that is so great about our community. But that also frees up product, right? If you're moving out of your single family home and into those kind of places, then that single family home then becomes available for another community. The other thing is that we have really focused on product type, affordability and type, because making sure that there is a condo for a young tech entrepreneur that may not want to be mowing lawns, or, we didn't have a lot of that product. So over the last, I guess, about 8 years, we've really focused on that housing product, like an affordability part of it, absolutely, because that's incredibly important, but also a diversity in product.
Right.
And because we want to be able to offer those different products. When you think about what we're trying to achieve at Metro, we're talking about smaller units. We're affordable by design, but also more aligned with the idea that maybe you don't have to have a car, that you can hop on the Metro, or you can grab an Uber, or those kinds of things. Right. And I think that we've done a pretty good job of kind of going in that new direction of trying to make sure we have a diverse housing stock here. Sure. And that is going to allow for, and as we start to build more nightlife and we start to build more amenities, that's really going to make, it's going to make more people think, oh, Loudoun County, that is going to be a great place where I can live from 21 to 81. And that's really what we're trying to look for.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, let's talk about the future. My job as a retirement planner is to help people look, 20 or 30 years down the road. And some people think, I'm crazy when I say, hey, you could live into your 90s, but it's obviously very true. And so we're planning for their financial futures. How far do you look into the future as a county leader? How far down into the future do you look for the county's economic strategy?
Yeah, well, our strategy, our active strategy, we kind of look at 20 years, but we're looking 40 years, 50 years out. Loudoun County has grown so fast for so long that we are starting to, not there yet, but we're starting to see that level off. We're at 435 now, build out, we're probably 5 something, right? Okay. So, when I started, we were in the 2s. So now we're in the 4s. Right. So we have less growth to go than we've experienced. Sure. It's a different kind of economy when you're not growing as fast, when you are dependent on, and we have seen that here in Loudoun County, those 20 and 30% year over year growth in our economic base. Right. We won't have that into the 2030s and the 2040s. We'll have experiencing growth, but we won't have that same level. Sure. So it is about thinking different in how you plan for the future. I will say that projecting into the future is probably harder now than it's ever been before. Sure. Because there's so many unknowns and so many variables. Yeah. But right now, trying to make sure we have the base that we can continue to build on, and then manage that slowing of growth by providing the resources and putting the resources in place now. We won't have to build as many schools in the future as we've had to. We'll have less need for the same recreational facilities, or we're getting to the point where we're almost built out from a road network. So we're becoming a more mature community.
Got it.
And that's important. But I think that what we have done very well is we've built a base that is so strong and pretty resilient. I don't think any economy is recession proof, but I do think the Loudoun economy, based on proximity to Washington, D.C., and the technology and the growth of technology, makes us fairly recession resistant.
Absolutely.
And so I think all of those things, we try to make decisions based on short term with an eye on long term. And I think that's really, really important. Just like it is in what you do with your customers, I think it's important that we as the government started to talk about how do we make sure that we're ready for that leveling somewhat.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that. Speaking about the future, what is your long-term vision for Loudoun County?
Well, I think that what we want to see is that three real distinct areas. We want to make sure that we're able to fully leverage Metro. We're one of the few places in the world that has greenfield opportunities around Metro. And we can create a new product type that we haven't had before. Imagine, going to businesses like I'm able to do and say to them, hey, how would you like to have a office location that is one stop from the Dulles Metro or two stops from the Dulles Airport? I mean, these are really important and exciting opportunities for businesses.
Yep.
But we also want to make sure we're preserving Western Loudoun for what it is and the resource that it is. And then the suburban area in the middle is that mix, right? That's where most of the business is going to be. That's where most of the residents are going to be. Preserving the quality of life, along with being able to make sure that we are future proof, is not an easy trick. But I think in Loudoun County, we've really done that. And you go all the way back to, when the airport was built, and you look at how, the water came and, the sewer came, and then we started to see the road networks, and then we saw the internet arrive, and, AOL and all that. And, it's been this really well-managed evolution. So, I mean, I think you have to look back to the boards in the 50s, 60s, and through today, and really compliment them for the way they've managed this growth.
Absolutely.
I remain optimistic about Loudoun's future. I think that we have built a great base on which to live.
Yep, I agree. Final question, Buddy. From your perspective, what does a financial future look like for retirees and near retirees living and retiring in Loudoun County?
Yeah, I do believe that we are in a strong position. We always have concerns about housing costs. One of the challenges with being such a successful community is that demand. I think, we're down to like 10 days or 15 days for most houses to get bought when they're on the market. That's amazing. But with that comes those challenges when it comes to price.
Sure.
But we as a county being able to invest a penny of our tax rate into affordable housing, doing affordability by design in the new areas around the metros, and just being very mindful about building that community. I think that benefits retirees and the future, because think about it. I mean, you're looking ahead in your job.
Right.
We want to make sure that we're also doing our part to make sure that people can live here and can continue to thrive here. It's such a great community, such a great place to live. We want to make sure we're doing the right things to make sure that continues and that everyone can enjoy that success.
Well, Buddy, I think you and your team are doing a phenomenal job. Totally agree. I think this county is amazing, just an amazing place to live and work. And this is where we're planting our flag for the long term. And so thank you to everything that you've done and your team has done to make this county a better place to live and work. Buddy Rizer, thanks so much for joining the Retirement Key podcast today. Thank you for coming on as a guest.
This was a real pleasure for me. I really enjoyed the conversation, Abe.
Thank you, buddy.